This is called a pinch pleat drapery, and there's 3 folds at the top, and it's just pinched right there at the bottom of the fold. The folds are about 4 inches typically in height. We can custom make it to 5 inches, 6 inches, and the pleating right now is very close just for the sake of proportions in the display case, but those are typically about 5 inches apart. So this is basically the pleat area right here. In between the 2 pleat is the pleat spacing. The pleat header is typically 4 to 5 inches. It could be 7 inches if you want it to be. So when you're calling out for the height of the pleat, this would be the height of the pleat. The space of the pleat is the distance between the two pleats. This is the leading edge of the drapery, which is the inwardmost side of the drapery. And typically if you have a trim, it would go down the lead edge, and the inside of the lead edge is the hem. So the hem side typically is about an inch, inch and a half, and it has it's folded and sewn right here. The back side of the pleat, as you can see, has this is the reverse side of it, has pin hooks that we put inside of the seams that are sewn, and these pin hooks serve as sort of anchors that go inside of the rings that hang on the ceiling or the wall. These pin hooks also can be hung inside of a track with carriers. This lining is, we use a few types of lining for draperies. This is a sateen lining, just a lining by itself, and it's typically made about an inch or a half an inch above the bottom of the outside of the main material. And this is because sometimes drapes need to be adjusted, and when they sit on the floor, sometimes they break a certain way, and you don't want it to be the lining, the white lining on the back of the drape to ever be showing. Typically, the hem of the drape is about 4 inches high. Sometimes they're 5 inches. And if you want a smaller hem, you just can call out for a 1-inch hem or a half an inch hem or a baby hem. These are goblet pleats. Typically, they could be pinched here at the bottom to make true goblets, or they can just be left alone, and it's called a pencil pleat if you do that. So it's basically the same sort of pleats, and in the top of it we stuff it with Dacron just to give it that body and round out the pleats. This is called a box pleat, and on the top you can't really see the detail very well, but this is a box pleat but has pencil pleats in between the actual boxes. So this is actually a mesh fabric that has a silk at the bottom of it, and it's also acting as its own banding. This is your standard box pleat. It's like a French pleat or a pinch pleat on the back of it, so it's inverted to have lines that go up and down, and it creates a box feel to it. So again, this spacing, the vertical spacing of the line could be anywhere from 4 inches, 5 inches, whatever you specify, but typically we do it at about 5 inches. The next drapery we have here is a ripple fold drapery, and the ripple fold typically is on track and carriers, and the ripple fold has a nice S shape for the heading, and typically it just hangs straight up and down at the bottom of a track. For the next demonstration, I want to kind of break down the component parts and the nomenclature of this bamboo shade. This right here is a valance, and this valance is typically made standard here at the Woven Company at 6 inches, and the valance piece is stapled onto the head rail, and the head rail is typically 1.5 inches. That's the standard, but we can make head rails from 3/4 of an inch to 1 inch to 1.5 inches, all the way up to 4 inches. Typically, the valance is stapled on the inside of its top to the wood piece, and the flap hangs down from the front of the shade. Behind the valance, you typically get the mechanism. The mechanism on this particular shade is the Rolleys bead and clutch system. We call it the clutch or continuous chain. There's a number of ways the industry calls it, but if you call out for a clutch here at the Woven Company, we'd understand. The way it's constructed is it's made with an 1.25-inch tube with an 1.25-inch tube with strings that are screwed on and attached that attach to the back of the shade's bottom ring and looped in with rings all the way up to the top. And the rings at the bottom control the lift system, which when you turn this clutch, it brings the shade up. The way this is put together, it's called a back mount, and because the reason why we call it a back mount is because the actual real shade is mounted to the back of the headrail, and you have a valance that covers the front to protect and to hide, aesthetically hide the clutch components in the front. This is a flat shade that's very wrinkled, but we're going to explain the different parts and functions of the parts that go in it. I'm going to turn this around to the side. This shade, it has a 3/4-inch headrail, which is very thin for cases where molding is very limited and you don't want the protrusion to extend beyond the actual window casing. So we make these for the designers at 3/4 of an inch, which this is probably the lowest you want to go, because if you make it any smaller or thinner, it'll be very brittle. The headrail will snap and break. This is fabric is mounted off the front of the shade, which leaves a problem. The cord lock is at the back of the actual shade itself. So whenever the client wants to reach for the cord, they have to lift the back of the shade up or move around it or hit the side to actually access the shade. But the reason why a lot of clients like it is it's a clean look, because once the shade goes up, you don't really see the cord if it's tied up on a cleat somewhere, and it's a very clean look. A lot of people prefer that over the back-mounted shade with a valance in the front. This is the Nguyen bamboo shade. This is again mounted from the back. The shade is actually back-mounted with the 6-inch valance. Headrail. This headrail is actually a 3/4-inch headrail. And when you have a bamboo shade that's actually mounted on a headrail, you have an issue of how thick the actual projection is. So instead of it being 3/4, it actually comes out to about 1.25 inches now, because of the thickness of the doubling up of the bamboo fabric in the front and the bamboo fabric in the back. So that's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with very small and limited projections for the molding. As far as the back, this is basically a blackout shade that's a blackout lining that's attached to the Nguyen. So from the front, you won't be able to see through the back. Light is basically protected by the blackout, but you do get light bleedage from the sides. When I turn the shade around, the shade it has grommet holes from 4 inches from the top, and the cord is strung through the grommets and attached to the mechanism at the top. At the bottom, there's bottom rings that keep the cords in place, and underneath here there is a rod that is placed and sandwiched in the bottom of the rod. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Hope you had a wonderful time, and I hope to see you again very soon. Thanks.